Marc Kealey, thank you so much for being here with us. Let me introduce you to our audience. Marc Kealey served as a former advisor to Liberal former Prime Minister John Turner. How are you doing today?
I'm very, very well. Thank you very much. And thanks for having me. This is a great opportunity.
It's our pleasure. Canada is a country where people have the right to choose, the right to speak and express their opinions. Too much has been said about the Truckers' Convoy for Freedom movement. Our team had the opportunity to interview some leaders of the group, as well as truckers and local citizens in support of this movement. Each one of them told us that there had been no violence, vandalism, or racist messages in the city they have been to. If people's statements are real, can citizens continue to trust the government after calling this group of protesters violent, terrorists, racist, occupants, and launching a state of emergency?
So I'm going to answer your question this way. Our Constitution, you're absolutely correct. It does give us the right to have freedom of assembly, to protest, to challenge our government from time to time, and make sure that if we are not necessarily aligned with what our government is doing, we have vehicles to do that. But our rights are not at the expense of actually impeding other people's rights. And this is what happened. The protest in Ottawa it should have been and could have been, for all intents and purposes, a day-long event. It turned out to be almost a month-long event, and it became an occupation. And I think the majority of people in and around Ottawa who said my rights are being infringed upon because I am being subjected to loud honking noises from the truckers that were there, boisterous activity that was happening in and around that area of the parliamentary precinct, they call it. So it became very problematic for people that were living there. So the protest was impeding on the rights of people to actually have life, liberty, and the pursuit of a good quality of living. And so from that perspective, I think the Prime Minister demonstrated probably a little more frustration than I think he should have, because I keep saying if you're the Prime Minister of this country, you don't have the luxury of despair. And I think maybe it was an unfortunate choice of words to label the entire protest as being racist or being misogynist or being terrorists. But there was an element of illegality, and I think that's where people really need to understand that, yes, there are people that choose not to get a vaccine. There are people that choose, not to subject themselves to wearing a mask or to being vaccinated or even to uphold the mandates. But I'm sorry, we're in a pandemic. And, I'm not going to apologize for us being in a pandemic. We have to look out as government, as public health authorities, as enforcement. We have to look at what's best for everybody in this country. And so the mandates through public health and the recommendations about restrictions really were something that I think Canada had to impose to really put this the virus under control. And it isn't meant to impede people's rights. It's meant to control and restrict the growth of this terrible virus that has killed almost 17,000 people in this country. That's an awful lot of people that 2 years ago would have probably been enjoying a wonderful start to spring of 2022.
So are you saying that this government did the right things?
I'm saying that the protest became an occupation, which was illegal. And I'm saying that the protest had to be stopped because it was impeding or infringing on the rights of people who would live and operate around that area. It had a cost. It had a price tag. It impeded business that would normally have been going on. And so I think that the government had to do and had to act very swiftly. Well, I shouldn't say swiftly because it took 3 weeks, but it had to act with the kind of resources that it needed to get this protest, this occupation to end.
The different media outlets documented the violent arrests in the city of Ottawa. Criticism of the current government was very strong, and there was a constant question: where was the dialogue and democracy that this country presumes to have?
Look, I don't want to presuppose that the police and their job was to promote violence. That was not it at all. There was a pushback from those who were assembled, we'll call them protesters, that forced an opportunity for reaction and reaction. So when those kinds of things happen, the police have the authority under the Emergencies Act that was given to them by the government to do what they needed to do. These are extraordinary circumstances. And the extraordinary circumstances had called for an equal or extraordinary reaction from law enforcement who had every right to do what they were doing under the Act. The Act is now gone. That doesn't happen every day. We know that this was an extraordinary measure, and that extraordinary measure called for an extraordinary reaction. And that's what we got.
Yes, obeying the law is very important. The past cannot be changed, but you who have had the opportunity to advise former prime ministers, do you think that the advice failed?
That's a great question, and I'll answer it this way. I keep saying that the prime minister started out this process by imposing what I call, in communications parlance, concern. And then, he said, look, this is an issue. COVID has decimated the economy. It's ruined people's lives. It's made us feel very uncomfortable with what's happening. But then he went on to say action. The action is, here's what we're doing. We've put guardrails around. We've made sure that we've got good recommendations from public health to manage what we need to manage. And I think things have happened that way and done it very well. But the last thing that he did talk about was the perspective. This was not the entire country. This was a very small percentage of people who, now we're seeing it now, some of them like to cause trouble anyway. Others were there because, yeah, you're right, they had a willingness to say, I want my voice to be heard. But their voice was heard. So when he talks about the perspective here, the perspective was this was not a good number of Canadians who were doing this. This was a small rump group of people who occupied that area. So the advice if I was giving advice to the Prime Minister was, you don't have the luxury of despair, sir, so you can't say that we're in a tough spot. You're doing good things to make sure this happens, and that you're listening to people. This is, I think, a big problem we have right now with both sides on any argument, especially through this pandemic, that we haven't had very decent two-way dialogue. If somebody's got a concern, their concerns should be addressed. And if their concerns are addressed and it's not to their liking, there are other ways to advocate. And this is what I've been saying, and I think that politicians have been unfairly treated in this entire exercise because they're trying to do the right thing for the wide majority of people. And oftentimes a very small group, like we saw in Ottawa, likes to think that this protest appeals to everybody across the country, and it does not.
If you were part of the government right now, would you agree to confiscate the bank accounts of the protesters as well as remove their licenses for life and seize their vehicles?
So I'm going to answer your question this way. The Government of Canada, imposed the Emergencies Act. The Emergencies Act says quite clearly that if money is coming into an event or an activity or a group that is suborning illegal activity, the government has the right to stop that money from coming in. So that's what happened under the Act. There was the opportunity to raise money through GoFundMe or Give, Send, Go. It gave an opportunity to fund an occupation which was illegal, which was the reason why the Act came into place in the first instance. So yes, I'm very supportive, and I would have advised the government to say, I think you have every right to seize people's bank accounts who are getting funding for that. As far as the truckers were concerned and those trucks that were confiscated, the cost of that protest just for policing alone was $1 million a day. For 3 weeks, that's $21 million. And so even they said, and I heard the mayor of Ottawa say, we're confiscating those vehicles and we're going to sell them because we need them. We want to make back some of the money that we've spent on this terrible 3-week ordeal or 3.5-week ordeal. So yes, I think that happened too, but it's over now. Yes. So the Emergencies Act have been revoked, and so all of that activity is gone. However, and I think this is an important point, that the investigations around those people who perpetrated this still must be undertaken.
Are you saying that a demonstration is illegal in Canada?
I'm not saying that a demonstration is illegal in Canada. I'm saying that a protest is quite reasonable to assume, but when the protest becomes an occupation and illegal, it becomes illegal. And that's what ended up happening here. So we need to be very clear that you have a right in Canada to assemble, but you have a right to assemble when it doesn't impede on other people's rights, which is what happened.
Yes, that's true. Citizens were aware of what will happen if they disobey the law. But is the revocation of the Emergencies Act proof that the Prime Minister was wrong when he invoked it?
No, I think what he did was he invoked the Emergencies Act to give extraordinary powers, and I'm being very clear here, extraordinary powers to law enforcement to get rid of that occupation. That happened. Everything was moved. The streets were cleared. Protesters dispersed. There's no need to keep the Emergencies Act. So it wasn't a failure. It was actually a wonderful thing, and it succeeded quite well.
Once again, Marc Kealey, thank you so much for being here with us. Please feel free to give a message to our audience.
I think we have a huge opportunity now as Canadians to come together. When we're working together in these extraordinary times and we have concerns, I think we have an advocacy opportunity with our members of parliament, with media, with our cultural groups to at least put forward really reasonable exchange of ideas that help. If we're fighting all the time and we're ruining other people's enjoyment of life, and we're vandalizing, or we're making racial slurs, these kinds of things that really hurt and are hurtful, I don't think there's a place for that in Canada.
Thank you so much again, Marc Kealey, for being here with us. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.